architecture of belief. Dense and academic in tone, it nevertheless became the intellectual foundation for nearly everything he would produce afterward: his lectures, podcasts, interviews, and later religious-themed lecture series. The book wove together psychology, mythology, religion, literature, and neuroscience to explain how people make sense of existence through stories. For Peterson, myths weren't relics of the past. They were practical tools people used to confront chaos, fear, and uncertainty. That framework, a constant tension between order, the known, and chaos, the unknown, with meaning located at the boundary between them, became the organizing idea behind his entire body of work. Once identified, the pattern reappears throughout his later material, from talks on politics to religion to personal responsibility. Even 12 Rules for Life, the book that made him a household name, reads as a more accessible, practical distillation of ideas he had already mapped out 2 decades earlier. For many readers navigating a confusing modern world, that wasn't just advice. It functioned as a coherent explanation for why life feels difficult and what to do about it. Maps of Meaning, in that sense, was a quiet engine behind his entire public appeal. That engine eventually found its platform. In 2013, Peterson launched the YouTube channel Jordan Peterson Videos. At first, it functioned more like an archive than a media venture, a place to store old lectures. Starting in 2014, he began uploading recorded university courses, including Personality and its Transformations and Maps of Meaning. These recordings, once destined to gather dust in a campus archive, suddenly became accessible to anyone online. People searching for content on psychology or the meaning of life would stumble across the long-form lectures, and many stayed, watching one after another. In 2016, Peterson shifted his approach, telling viewers he intended to clean up older videos and improve the production quality of new ones. It was a small announcement with a large implication. He had stopped behaving like a professor who happened to post lectures online and started operating more like a media producer, paying closer attention to editing, titles, and presentation. By August 2018, the channel had surpassed 1.8 million subscribers and 65 million views. Remarkable numbers for content that consisted of dense lectures and long-form debate rather than quick entertainment. His audience kept returning, which showed that his rise wasn't built on a single viral controversy, but on a sustainable, repeatable body of substantive content. The real turning point came in September 2016, when Peterson released videos opposing Canada's proposed Bill C-16, describing it as a step toward compelled speech, and objecting in particular to being required to use certain gender-neutral pronouns. The videos spread rapidly, and almost overnight Peterson went from a psychology professor in Toronto to a symbol in a much larger cultural battle. The bill itself was narrower than the ensuing public storm suggested. It added gender identity and expression to Canada's Human Rights Act and Criminal Code, extending anti-discrimination protections to transgender people. Legal experts argued it wasn't designed to criminalize accidental pronoun mistakes, but rather to address discrimination and hate speech. That gap between the law's actual scope and Peterson's characterization of it fueled much of the controversy. On campus, tensions boiled over into protests, counter-demonstrations, and public confrontations, and the debate quickly expanded beyond legal specifics into a broader argument over free speech, identity, and institutional power. By the time the bill passed in 2017, Peterson had already become a nationally, increasingly globally recognized figure, alternately viewed as a free speech advocate, a reactionary provocateur, or an anti-establishment truth-teller, depending on who was watching. That fame reached a new level with the January 2018 release of 12 Rules for Life, which sold more than 10 million copies worldwide and topped bestseller lists across several countries. The book arrived at a moment when many readers fell adrift, and Peterson offered them a blunt, structured framework built around discipline, responsibility, and resilience. He followed the book with a grueling world tour spanning 45 cities and drawing more than 200,000 attendees, with a notably large contingent of young men seeking structure and direction. The events increasingly resembled personal transformation rallies rather than traditional lectures, even as protests and confrontations continued to follow him, including incidents in Portland and at Queen's University, and a widely viewed, contentious Channel 4 interview with Kathy Newman that further amplified his visibility. His podcast, launched in December 2016, became another pillar of his growing platform, eventually reaching roughly 500 million downloads and views by 2022, gaining radio syndication through Westwood One in 2019, and later securing a major partnership with the Daily Wire in 2022. Around this time, Peterson also stepped back from formal academic life, leaving the University of Toronto in late 2021 amid criticism of what he called ideological overreach in higher education. He went on to serve briefly as Chancellor of Ristad College, starting in 2022, stepping down in 2025, co-founded the Alliance for Responsible Citizenship in 2023, and helped launch Peterson Academy in 2024, an online education venture positioned as a lower-cost alternative to traditional universities. Peterson's rising profile brought escalating backlash. In 2019, Cambridge University rescinded a visiting fellowship offer after photos surfaced of him alongside a man wearing a shirt with an offensive, hateful slogan. The university's vice-chancellor said the image implied an endorsement inconsistent with its values. In June 2022, Twitter suspended his account over. Jordan Peterson's story starts far from the lecture halls and viral clips that would later define him. He grew up in Fairview, a small, unhurried town where life followed a predictable rhythm, and nobody expected much drama. His parents were far from radical. His mother, Beverly, worked as a librarian at Grande Prairie Regional College, and his father, Walter, taught school, bringing a sense of order and routine into the household. Faith was present but understated, a mild Christian backdrop rather than a defining force. Yet even as a boy, something in him pushed against that calm surface. He seemed to sense that life should carry more weight, more urgency, than the quiet town around him suggested. That restlessness found an early outlet in politics. At just 13, he joined the New Democratic Party, not as a bystander, but as an eager participant drawn to its message of fairness and social change. A year later, at 14, he ran for a leadership position within the party and lost by a mere 13 votes. It was a narrow defeat, but a telling one. People had noticed him. During this period, he also spent time in the orbit of political figures, such as Sandy Notley, whose family influenced his early political outlook. Around the same time, his relationship with religion began to unravel. In confirmation classes, he started asking pointed questions about the story of Genesis, about evolution, about what was actually true, and found the answers he received unconvincing. Slowly, the soft religious backdrop of his upbringing faded away entirely. He came to view organized faith as something for people unwilling to grapple with harder questions, replacing it with a commitment to reason and logic. By his teenage years, he had become an unusual combination, a believer in political transformation who had firmly rejected religious belief. After finishing high school in 1979, Peterson enrolled at Grande Prairie Regional College to study political science and English literature. The choice fit the person he'd been becoming, someone preoccupied with power, systems, and society. He also had a practical ambition. He pictured himself as a sharp, successful corporate lawyer, someone equipped to navigate complicated institutions and come out ahead. That plan was upended by a book. While in college, Peterson read George Orwell's The Road to Wigan Pier, and it left him shaken. The book's uncomfortable argument that people who claim to champion equality are sometimes motivated by resentment rather than genuine compassion struck uncomfortably close to home. It forced him to question the political convictions he had held with such certainty since adolescence. That questioning deepened after he completed his political science degree in 1982 and spent a year traveling through Europe. The trip exposed him to sites tied to history's worst atrocities, places where ideology had curdled into destruction. It left him with a question that would shape the rest of his career. How do ordinary people end up participating in something so catastrophic? Political science, he realized, could describe systems, but it couldn't explain the psychology driving the people inside them. So he started over, pursuing a second degree, this time in psychology, which he completed in 1984. It marked a genuine reinvention, redirecting his focus from institutions to the human mind, the fears, motivations, and hidden mechanisms that push people toward either order or chaos. Peterson's psychological research intensified at McGill University, where he studied alcoholism, not simply as a behavioral habit, but as an expression of deeper psychological patterns. His research focused on the sons of alcoholic fathers, and he found something notable. Even when sober, many of these men struggled with planning and flexible thinking and showed heightened stress responses. Alcohol, he observed, didn't just damage them. In the short term, it seemed to soothe their internal turmoil, which made it more insidious rather than less. The finding illustrated how vulnerability could be embedded in a person well before it showed up as visible behavior. Gradually, his individual-level psychological research began merging with his older questions about ideology and society. The same patterns of disorder and instability he saw in individuals appear to echo in larger social systems. This convergence of ideas would eventually take him to Harvard in the early 1990s, where his teaching stood out immediately. Students didn't merely attend his lectures. They were pulled into them, describing the experience as transformative, engaging with questions of meaning and responsibility rather than dry theory. That distinctive teaching style was a product of everything that came before: a small-town childhood, an early political awakening, a rejection of faith, the jolt of reading Orwell, unsettling reflections from Europe, and first-hand clinical exposure to real psychological suffering. From Harvard, Peterson moved to the University of Toronto, where his life grew even busier. He combined teaching with clinical practice, seeing roughly 20 patients a week dealing with aggression, addiction, and anxiety. This direct exposure to real struggles changed the tone of his lectures. They became more urgent, grounded less in abstraction, and more in lived experience. Around this time, he began recording long lectures on personality, mythology, and meaning. Initially, only a small audience, students in a room and a handful of people online, took notice. But those recordings carried an unusual intensity, blending psychology, philosophy, and storytelling in a way that set them apart from standard academic lectures. In 1999, Peterson published his first book, Maps of Meaning,